Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed Liberty Day on Wednesday. Woohoo! It's kind of a break in the middle of the week, kind of broke things up. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you were waiting for somebody to get on the screen in Zoom on Wednesday, I'm so sorry. I thought we put the notice out to everyone. So you'll notice that we had a preparation for virtual machine build. That was a 4.1 assignment. That should have been familiar territory for everyone. That should already be done. And then we had a virtual devices in RAM assignment that was due, and it was a quick walkthrough of how to capture the creation of virtual devices in an operating system with device drivers, and how RAM address ranges are reserved for those virtual devices, and how that becomes a solution that allows multiple applications to work with or to multitask with your computer devices. So when you look at computer hardware and digital components, you might ask yourself, how is it that I can use the internet and my networking with my email, my instant messaging, my web browser, my such and such app, right? It's because each of those has the capacity to use a virtual network card, which the operating system creates as a representation in every form and function, right? So here's a Wi-Fi network card, works just like the real thing. It's built virtually into an address range, and with ample random access memory, you can multitask the heck out of that thing so that you create those representations of a Wi-Fi card. Now that's an oversimplification, but that's it in a nutshell, what's happening. Your goal for this assignment was to go ahead and do that on your own system, and then just have an example of a memory address range that was clearly shown for credit. Both of these assignments were to set the stage for what I call the granddaddy of computer architecture assignments. And again, some of you are going to look at this and you might roll your eyes and go, oh, this is deja vu, because I've smelled and tasted something like this in another class. If you are part of the ACS Tech certificate program, and you're taking the 1 credit virtual lab, or if you're in other courses like CSC241 and its scientific computing applications, we build a virtual machine there, and it's based on Ubuntu, right? You could have a Kali virtual machine from other systems, right? From other classes. If you're in cybersecurity classes, you might have a Kali virtual machine. So I want you to notice this clause at the bottom. It says, you are welcome to use another Linux distribution as shown in class on Friday. Now, all right, so I got to update that. So it says 2023. What we want you to do is to create your own virtual machine. And that's not the same as creating virtual components where an operating system has to multitask. What we're saying instead is that due to advances in hardware, so this is the hands-on fun Friday kind of thing, you need to have a minimum of 8 gigs of disk space. So what we're going to do is create a very small footprint. I'm going to walk through the steps of how to create this. We're going to do this in class today. If you have your system in front of you, like you should every Friday, you're probably ready to do the same steps as I do them. And by the time we finish our session, well before our class period is up at 10:50, right? I'll turn you loose early. You'll have half of this done already. Okay, so start your engines, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't fired up your laptop, if you don't have it nearby or handy, now's the time to do this. Now, here's a word of caution for you. It's been said that pregnant mothers are tired all the time because they're building, eating, sleeping for two. In the case that you have twins or triplets, it's actually you're eating, sleeping, breathing for 3 or 4, right? Has anyone ever heard this before? Has anyone ever heard this before? Are you serious? None of you have been around pregnant mothers before? You've never heard somebody say that before? What do we have in class? Can somebody unmute your microphone and tell me we're breathing today?
Yeah, we're breathing. I personally have not heard that phrase before.
You have not personally heard that before. Okay. All right. Well, it is a common statement made by pregnant mothers, expectant mothers, and they're tired all the time, right? They're overtaxed. Their system is overtaxed. Where am I going with this? When you build a virtual machine, what you're doing is you're building a full computer system inside a computer system. It's kind of like taking your laptop and turning it into an expectant mother. Now, this is a different way of explaining the process. And this is the first time I have attempted to explain the process in just such a manner. But I really want to connect the dots for some of you that use laptops and you never plug the darn thing in, okay? If you have a power supply and you're following along, you need to plug it in now. Because as you're building a whole computer system inside a computer system, it's like an expectant mother who is really getting tired and has to eat more often, has to visit the restroom more often. There's so much more overhead that happens in the course of this process. Your battery life is going to go way down very fast. And what's going to happen is that if you get halfway through this, and the build doesn't work right, it's going to be ugly. It's not going to go well, okay? I just want to be honest with you. So if you're joining the class from a laptop, this is the time where you break out the power supply, connect the power supply, and make sure that you have ample power so that you're not in power save mode and you're not trying to drive this process from a battery that is half depleted. That is a train wreck, and very bad things can happen. I've even seen host machines crash. Now, here is some virtual machine etiquette I would like to share with you before we get started with. And I think this is one of the coolest things that I think we do in our course, in our computer architecture course, is that you get an opportunity to really see how far Moore's law has taken us. We've said that Moore's law, what is it that doubles every 18 months to 2 years?
The transistors.
The transistors or logic gates in a CPU, right? So every 18 months, good day, how are you? Every 18 months to 2 years, the number of transistors, the number of circuits and transistors in a CPU tend to double. And that's an oversimplification, but the point is that we've often said that if cars duplicated the same process that computer engineers have performed over the years, over the decades, with CPU design, you'd get a Lamborghini Countach S. You could pay $1 for the car. It would run 1,000,000 miles on a gallon of gas, and it would go from 0 to 60 in 1/10 of a second, right? I mean, that's a crude analogy, but the point is it'd be really more like the flying ship in Back to the Future. It'd be more like the flying car. Everybody's seen the flying car in Back to the Future, right?
Yeah.
The flying car, the time traveling car. That's really what we're talking about. Okay.
Of course.
Yeah. So even very modest machines are capable of running virtual machines. And if you do this right, even if you have very little disk space, you'll be able to pull this off and it'll work really well. Now, I want to tell you, if you didn't do this, you're going to want to do this probably before you build the virtual machine in class, but you can still follow along with the steps, and you should. The first thing you should do is make sure that you have installed VirtualBox, right? Download and install VirtualBox and extensions. Capture an image of About screen showing the latest version. Now, you may already have VirtualBox on your system. That's cool if you do, but one thing you want to know is that half the time this silly little thing doesn't work right. So when you check for updates, half the time that really doesn't. Oh, okay. So this time it did work. So it says new version found. I'm sorry. I should drink another cup of coffee. New version found, right? Everybody sees that. You should be on 7.0.12. If you have VirtualBox installed for other purposes, you are going to want to uninstall 10, download 12, along with the extension pack, and then load those both. So what am I saying? I have some virtual machines on here. We haven't done this in our class yet, have we? We have not yet built a virtual machine in this class in particular. Is that a correct statement? I believe it is.
Yeah.
Now we've done it in other classes for other purposes. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Control Panel. And if you're in this situation, this is the same thing I want you to do. I want you to go to Control Panel to where it says Programs and Features. And I want you to intentionally go to where it says Oracle. And that's after all the Microsoft stuff. Find Oracle and uninstall it. And then say, yeah, I really do want to uninstall it. Now, while that's uninstalling, I want you to open a browser. And I want you to go to virtualbox.org. And if you have a Mac with an Intel processor, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to click on Download 7.0 and you'll download the Windows host. Now, when you're downloading the Windows host, you also have to download something called the extension pack. And we just walked through the creation. Well, you captured the creation of virtual digital components in Device Manager, yes? So your operating system creates virtualized copies in memory of each of your digital devices. We've already covered this. We did that on Monday, right? Everybody's with me. Now, your hardware is different from everybody else's hardware. And the extension pack here helps create those device driver connections. So Windows or the Mac OS X, whichever version you're on, you could be on, was it Catalina or it's one of those newer ones. Your OS is going to create those virtual versions, but there are hardware components and they have to be translated. To make a long story short, the VirtualBox extensions help the creation of those specialized components. You have unique components. If we have two identical laptops, the odds are still pretty good. There might be slight differences in the Wi-Fi card or in the CPU because one model has an i3 and the other one model has an i5. Or it could be that one has 8 gigs of RAM and the other one has 6 gigs of RAM. You understand what I'm talking about here, right? So the VirtualBox extension pack helps bridge the connection when you're creating an entire virtual system. It does something similar to what the operating system does when it's building virtual devices in Device Manager using address ranges in RAM, okay? Everybody connect the dots there. It's a helper. It's a helper that makes that more efficient and more stable. And a lot of times things don't work right if you don't have this. So I have both of those, and what I'm going to do now, it's asking if I still want to. I had a pop-up. It was a user account control that asked you, do I really want to uninstall 7.0.10? So while I was talking, there was a pop-up there and I missed it. Now it's uninstalling 7.0.10, and it should be done pretty quickly. And now I will go to downloads, my downloads folder. Everybody can see this screen, yes? I go to my downloads folder, and there's my VirtualBox and my extension pack. Now the extension pack doesn't look like anything because VirtualBox is uninstalled. If you have an old version of VirtualBox, it's gonna have a distinct icon, and that would be your first sign that something isn't squared away. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select it, then use the right mouse button, and use the right mouse button to context click that executable and run it as administrator. Now you could be logged in as an administrator, and in order to do this, if you aren't logged in with an account that has administrative privileges, you need to do that right now. But in addition to that, half the time we install software, it doesn't install properly because we're not running as admin when we execute it for install. So this is a good habit to do just the same. I'm going to say run as administrator. It's going to pop up and say, do I really want to do that? I'm going to say yes. That's what that little chime was. And away it goes. It's going to open up a screen. It'll have some defaults. I'll accept the defaults. I'll say next, yes, yes, yes. It's going to hiccup and we'll lose Zoom for like a second. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, if you get something that says you got to install redistributables, there's a link you can use to install the Microsoft Visual Studio C++ redistributables. That's popped up on some screens. Click next, you say yes. It's going to say something about missing dependencies, and you're just going to accept that and say yes, install anyway, because I don't want to worry about Python working with this junk. And away you go. Now, once VirtualBox 7.0.12 is installed, now you can install the extension pack. So as soon as this screen clears, you will see that it's there. The cool part about Debian is that it can use a very small footprint. And what I'm going to do now is start to download the Debian footprint. So if you're on a laptop or a PC that has very modest hard drive capacity, and you don't have 8 gigs to spare, and how do you know that? You go to this computer or my computer and you look. As far as I can tell, from earlier in the semester, when people submitted their specifics about their systems, I didn't see anybody that didn't have 8 gigabytes to spare. You want to look at the free space, and if you don't have something like 20 gigs free, you want to talk to me before you go any further. You probably don't want to run it all the way down, but you should have at least like 20 gigs free. And then if you create an 8 gig hard disk, you'd still have 12 gigs left, which should be plenty, right? I mean, just for this one activity. Everybody follow what I'm talking about? So now that I have that, it says I can start Oracle VirtualBox after installation. I'm going to finish this. And OracleBox is going to start up. If it does, it may detect that the older version of the extensions are already loaded, and it may flag the screen and say, hey, you can load the new extensions. Sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of weird that way. So I'm going to go back into my downloads. I'm going to see how the icon changed now? Now it's green. The icon changed. I can't right click and install it with administrative privileges because that's an installable, it's a self-extracting installable package. It's a long story. So I'm just going to double click it. When I double click it, it's going to say, hey, the current version is 7.0.10. The new version is this. Now, don't you think there'd be problems if you didn't know this, didn't load the extensions, and you had the old extensions working with the new version? Oh yeah, it would be a problem. So this is one of those finer points that keeps people from getting into trouble. I'm going to click upgrade, and I'm going to say, I've read all that, and now it's not grayed out anymore. I'm going to say, I agree. That's the end user license for use of this, right? So that's where we are. And I'm going to walk through the install setup. How do I get Debian? Now I have two flavors of Debian. I have one in my temp folder on the C drive, and that Debian is a DVD-sized install media. It's 3 point something gigabytes. It's a larger install media. You may not have that kind of space or that kind of bandwidth, and there's a smaller version you can download that's actually pretty cool. I'm going to work the build with the smaller one. I'm going to download it right now so you can see how that, how to get that and how to use that. So I'm going to open up Google Chrome, or go to your favorite browser. What you want to do is search for Debian, D-E-B-I-A-N. And as you get into this screen, I'm going to type in Debian downloads or distribution downloads, right? And getting Debian. And there's a recent version from October 6th, so it's not very old. There's a small installation image and a larger complete one. That's the one that I've already downloaded already. I'm going to use the 64-bit PC net install ISO. So I'm going to use 64 bits. I don't want to use torrents or BitTorrent unless I have a BitTorrent client on your system. And if you know what that is and you're already using it, I don't have to tell you what it is and how it works. I'm just going to tell you, you should be careful because BitTorrent has a nasty payback. I'm going to go ahead and click on this to download this. And this will work for Intel processors and for AMD processors. Now, if I want to, I can go up here and I can view downloads, and that'll give me a separate screen on the status. This is about 600 megs large. And in most internet service provider situations, 628 megs, it's not that much, right? It's not a lot. So that's a pretty good size. The thing that I want you to understand, though, is that we don't want to load this from the downloads folder. The downloads folder has a nasty habit of being part of a cloud profile for the user that's stored in OneDrive. So once this is downloaded, what we want to do is go into our downloads folder, and we want to copy this into a separate temp folder on our C drive. Now, if you haven't created a temp folder on your C drive, for the purposes of this solution, you're going to want to create 3 directories: a temp directory, a VHD directory, and a VM directory. You see those here: temp, VHD, and VM. What you're going to do is right-click this and go to New and create a folder. And first one is temp, second one is VM, third one is VHD. Any questions so far?
Yeah, Professor Kenta. I'm following along. Which download would it be? The AMD 64?
It would be the AMD 64-bit download.
All right, thanks.
It would be the smaller installation image 64-bit PC net install ISO, and then it'll say AMD, but it's Intel and AMD. It's 64-bit. You see that a lot. Just remember that you have 64-bit CPUs. 32-bit CPUs are long gone, except for portable devices on some phones. Now there are other images, but I don't want to go there. All right, so now that it's here, I'm going to make sure that I put it in my temp folder. So I'll click, and then I'll drag and drop into my temp folder. And so now when I use this, I'm using it from a directory on my C drive. On my hard drive, I'm not putting it in a directory that is potentially stored in the cloud with OneDrive. Does everybody understand that? Okay. That's going to take very little time to build this. But there are some screens that Debian's going to want to work through. And so what we're going to do next, after we have the VM and VHD directories created on our C drive, we're going to point our Oracle VirtualBox. We're going to go to Preferences and make sure that we're parking our virtual machine in the VM folder. So if you don't have it pointed, there's going to be some kind of VirtualBox folder in the user profile, which again could be OneDrive. What we want to do is hit the down arrow and hit Other, and then navigate to the PC, the C drive, and the VM folder. Everybody with me? Okay, next thing we're going to do, in the Tools option up here, if this is the first time you've installed VirtualBox, you're going to click here and go to Media. And what you want to do is create a hard disk in advance of the virtual machine build. So you're going to click Create, and you're going to leave the default setting VDI. You're going to select Pre-allocate Full Size, and you're going to change this so that it reads, what did we say for our assignment? Stand by. Debian Trial, right? So create a new virtual machine named Debian Trial. I want my hard disk to have the same name. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to put in Debian Trial.vdi, and I'm going to change this from 2 to 8 gigabytes. Everybody with me? Now, if you have lots of hard drive space, I would put 12. If you have ample hard drive space, put 16, right? I'll go ahead and put 12 here. Was there a question?
No, I just followed the
So now it's building the hard drive that we're going to use. It's a virtual hard drive. It's a single large file that functions and works just like a physical hard drive. And that's what we're building here. Now you see I have another Debian machine that's created, but I'm gonna build a new one, and I'm gonna call it Debian Trial. Okay.
Question, Professor.
Yes.
I already have a VirtualBox, right? But it's not Oracle, it's Parallels. The process would be any different?
It's not connected to what again?
I'm not using the Oracle virtual machine. I'm using the Parallels one instead.
It would be a similar process, but the menus and the features and functions would be in a different place for Parallels than for VirtualBox. And you can use Parallels just the same to complete this solution. So you're just going to find the same feature wherever it is in Parallels and perform the same steps, okay? So you'll create a virtual hard disk in Parallels before you go ahead and do that. Now, the virtual hard disk should be in the VHD folder. I don't know if you noticed that, but when I went to create the VHD, I was already pointed to that, but you might have to hit the pull down and then navigate in the directories to create the VHD file in the VHD folder. So as I look in the VHD folder, I'm starting to see, or I will see after it's done, that there's a disk in there. And yeah, everybody sees Debian Trial.
Yeah.
As it's building out, the file size is increasing, right? So right now it's 1 gigabyte large, but as soon as the screen refreshes, it's going to be 8. It's 74%. I have a traditional hard drive on this machine. I don't have an SSD. If you have a laptop with an SSD, it's already done, okay? This is going to save a lot of time when you're building your virtual machine, so the rest of the process will go a lot faster. So we'll get to the place where we can follow through with the basic wizard at the beginning of the OS install for Debian. And in most cases, you'll just select the defaults. But it's actually pretty cool how this works. So now I have a full-blown Debian trial that's 12, it's actually 12 gigs large. Everybody see that now? So I go to properties. It's, that's giving me the properties of the VHD folder. I want the properties of the Debian. That's 12 gigs, right? Everybody sees that? Yours would read 8 gigs if you were doing 8 gigs. And where is it stored? In the VHD directory. That's where I want it. Now, if it isn't there when you finish, move it there. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the machine menu and select add. And once I do, I'm going to say Debian trial. Just as I did, it's going to store in the default, which says VM, because I did that. And for the ISO image, I'm going to hit the pull down and select other. And as soon as I do that, I'm going to go to my temp folder. So it might open up in the C drive and I have to find my temp folder. I'm going to use the net install 600 gig, or if I have the bigger one, because I've got plenty of disk space, it's just quicker and easier and it'll be a shorter install with a larger download. So I'm going to select that. As soon as it sees Debian there, it's going to change it so that it says Linux. So in the background, it's changed the type of OS right there. Now here's the most important part you cannot miss. Please. Select the checkbox that says skip unattended install. You want it to prompt you for certain things. You don't want it to create a user account with a temporary password and then here's the login screen and you're like, what did it do? Unattended install means it's automatic and it does everything. And you're supposed to know all the rest of the things after it's there. You want to be along for the ride when this is built. Any questions so far? I click next. I'm going to give it, in this case, I have 16 gigs of RAM. I'm going to give it 6 gigs of RAM. So I'm going to put 6144 here. If you have 8 gigs of RAM, give it 4096 and don't run a lot of applications. Close your applications, close half the tabs that are open on your browser, and then give it 4 gigs of RAM. 4096 is the number. If you have more than one CPU, give it 2 CPUs. Leave this box unchecked, click next. And then in this space, you don't want to create a new virtual hard disk. We already did. We want to use an existing hard disk. So I'm going to point to this. And right now it knows in the VHD folder, oh, that's where my stuff is. It's Debian's 16 gigs. Or no, it was new Debian, wasn't it? Debian trial, 12 gigs. Make sure you don't get confused and pick a hard disk for another virtual machine that can end very badly. Any questions so far? So I say finish, and now the cool part comes in. I'm going to click settings, and I'm going to check a few things. The first thing I'm going to check when this opens up is to see whether I have any yellow exclamation points. If you have yellow exclamation points, there are some simple changes you can take that will usually prevent your virtual machine from causing a problem. The most common one happens to be things like, okay, when I click on system, oh, there's a floppy, I don't have a floppy disk on my laptop. Does anyone here have a floppy disk drive on their PC or their laptop? No, that's really old school. How about this on display? Everybody see video memory? Do you think 16 megabytes is enough for a video card? Heck no. I'm going to slide this all the way down. Some of you have graphics controllers or GPUs on your system. You want to take advantage of that. So you want to check this box. If you can enable 3D acceleration, that's a good thing to do. When you click storage, you want to see your Debian install media and you want to see the hard drive. For network, if you can, you want to do bridged. And if you can't, if you do bridged and then you get a yellow exclamation point, change it back to NAT, okay? Everybody with me so far? We're gonna click OK. And now we're gonna start it. When we start it, we're gonna start it in detachable mode, which means we want it to operate more independently. And if you're on a laptop, you want to have your power cord plugged in. You're gonna do detachable start, and what's gonna happen is all sorts of magic. In the next 60 to 90 seconds, we're gonna see a series of screens come up. And what I want you to do, if you need to go to another class or you need to check out because you have somewhere you have to be, I want you to accept that what you're doing is clicking on the default options and just working through the rest of the install process until you get an install prompt. Right now, you'll see when I double click this, it says graphical install. So I'm going to hit enter. I want to install with a GUI. I want a graphical install. I don't want to have to figure out command lines to install the media. I want to use English. I want to use the United States English and not UK or all that, right? The keyboard, I want to accept the defaults. I'm going to accept the defaults. You're going to get lots of these prompts. And in some cases, you just have to read and then select or do what comes natural. If it says, hey, you got to pick a drive to install this on, and it's not selected, you didn't pick the drive. So if there's a drive that's listed with all sorts of gobbledygook characters, on faith, I want you to select it if that's the only thing that's on the screen, and then say continue, right? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff with this installation. It's now 10:55. So if you are, if you need to be elsewhere by 11 o'clock and you need to peel off at this point, I will understand. But I'm going to go ahead and keep walking through the rest of this. It might be done in 3 or 4 minutes, all right? Or pretty much done in 3 or 4 minutes. Any questions before we continue?
No.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna accept the host name Debian, but I could put something interesting in there. I could use a favorite actress, actor name, whatever. Favorite anime character, right? I could do that. I'm just going to use, I already have one called Debian, so I'm going to call this one Toto, as in little dog Toto, somewhere over the rainbow, right? All that kind of stuff. All right, continue. The domain name, I'm going to create my own domain name or just leave it blank. I'm going to use Groovy, as in gruvi.net. gruvi.net. That's just me. Now it says I have to have a root password. This is really important. Whatever you type, make sure your caps lock is not engaged. Make sure you take your time. Make sure you have a complex but not crazy complex password. I'm going to put something in here. And I'm going to hopefully type it again correctly. This is the super user or root password. I want to make sure I take a note of this because if I forget it, I'm kind of screwed. I'm going to hit continue. And then the full name for the new user, I'm going to say Professor Kentop, because that's my official full name here at the university. For the name, I'm going to keep it Professor. Okay, whatever your first name is, that's the actual login name in the account you have to enter sometimes. Okay, now this is the password for the user named Professor, not the root password. I'm going to put in something else, something different. I am not going to use the same password because if I do, I am inviting disaster. Do I need to say that again, or does everybody accept that at face value?
No, it makes sense.
Okay, we're going to go continue. For now, there aren't as many time zones. I'm just going to accept Eastern. Now it's going to detect disks. This is where things get a little interesting and people get to a place where they're like, okay, what do I do now? And if you just say, use the entire disk except the default, right? Everybody sees this, right? Oh, here's a disk it lists. Did I create a 12 gig hard drive? Oh yeah, I did. Does it make sense? If this isn't selected, then select it and click continue. It's probably going to talk about grub, right? The disk can be partitioned, put it all in one partition. Then it's going to ask about the bootloader. Grub is the bootloader, right? I'm going to finish partitioning and write changes to the disk. I'm going to say continue. And then it's going to say, okay, I got to partition the disks. Do I want to write the changes? I'm going to say yes. Now, as long as this isn't pointing to the physical hard disk on your host machine, the virtual machine is called a guest. Your laptop is called the host. I'm going to continue. It's going to do some things, and then it's going to ask if it can load the boot routine so that the disk works when the thing starts up. In Linux, that's called grub. In Windows, it's the MBR, or main boot record. Okay, it's the boot sector of the operating system. Just remember that there's a utility that helps start the operating system up, start the computer up, and it's usually a boot utility, as in startup utility. And for Linux, it's called grub. We're going to see that in just a second. And as long as we get past that one particular hurdle, the rest is pretty automatic. It'll ask you to log in. It'll ask you a couple of other questions about simple things like, what kind of graphical interface do you want to load? You can accept GNOME and keep clicking continue. GNOME is spelled G-N-O-M-E. So you can click right through that. Or you can select Plasma, KDE. That's cool. Or you can select Cinnamon, because that sounds like a cool interface. Each of those are graphical environments that you will encounter when you come up on the screen the first time. And one of the things about Linux that's special is that you can custom fit what kind of graphical environment you come into. Question, when you install Windows 10, do you get to choose how Windows 10 is on the screen, or does everybody have the same taskbar down on the bottom? Same taskbar. And does the taskbar work the same? Or is it different for everybody? Pretty much the same, right? The thing I'm trying to tell you is in Linux, you can tell Linux as you're building the virtual machine, yeah, I want something techie. I want something sexy. I want something that's themed a certain way. And Cinnamon, there are distributions in Linux. If you've never tried Mint, it's really cool. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. Okay, so in just a moment, we'll have the pop-up about grub. I'm probably going to have to select an item and click continue. It's obvious there's only one item on the screen, so if you're not getting anywhere when you click next, just read, and if there's an obvious choice or an obvious listing on the screen, click it and keep going, and you're done. All you have to do is log in and capture the screen at that point. Now, there are specifics that you want to, so you'll notice this is a 5-point solution. Everybody sees 5 points, right? Everybody sees 5 points? If you want 5 points, when you read each task, it'll say, hey, I need you to capture an image about this, capture an image about the file properties, okay? Extend, what you gotta do is capture each of the criteria and include that with your submission. So there'll be 5 things that you need at a minimum, right? And so use the default account and password provided to log into the VM. Once the desktop GUI shows, click on Activities in the upper left corner, capture the screen showing the options expanded along the left of the virtual machine screen. So as soon as it opens up, you'll see Activities on the screen. Click it. That's where the fun begins. It's a computer you built from scratch that runs inside your computer. And by the way, if you're into hacking and stuff, just a thought, would you want something traced back to your physical computer? Or wouldn't it be cool to have another computer to use for certain things, right? I'm just saying. There are all sorts of advantages to using a virtual machine. And when we're talking about hacking stuff, I'm also referring to ethical hacking, right? I'm not referring to like breaking the law, doing bad things, hacking, emptying people's bank accounts. We don't teach that here. Ethical hacking. Any questions before we clear? Okay. I have someone in the waiting room. Okay. Everybody knows what we need, right? The 5 things. And here's our build. Oh yeah, here it is. It's talking about the group, the grub. I say yes, I hit continue. It says, do you want to do this? I say yes, I hit continue. It's going to ask me again, do I still want to do this? I'm going to say yes, continue. Right? Please replace it now. If you wish to scan another. Now, if this is a loop and it keeps looping, after a point, what would your next step be? Answer no. That's all right, United States. That's where it's getting the stuff from. I don't have a proxy. I'm just going to click next, 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 next. It'll ask the question about cinnamon versus plasma versus whatever. Pick one. Let it run. It's going to download some stuff off the internet too if it has connectivity. If it doesn't, it'll just finish the install. Okay.